and welcome to my channel, Melody Joy Quilts. I'm your host, Melody Joy. Today I'm showing you the progress I have made on this King's Crown University of Texas Halloween quilt. And I'm loving how it's turning out. I'm actually using a polyester batting, and so by using polyester, it's actually creating almost like a puff quilt texture. Polyester is a higher loft than cotton, and so it's really kind of creating that. Now I kind of messed up my quilt lines here. I've actually did some unpicking last night. I was originally going to quilt it one way, and then I decided to switch gears and do something different. So how I'm actually quilting it is using a zigzag decorative stitch to go around some of these blocks with white thread and a zigzag, and I have a little bit of unpicking to do over here, so don't look at that. But the back of the quilt, I'm super excited about. The back of the quilt, I found this fabric. This is a blanket that I got from my local grocery store, and this blanket has a lot of the same colors as the front of the quilt, and it's little ghosts wearing cowboy boots, and it's on like a really soft fleecy blanket. It was just the right size for me to do 4 blocks across and 5 blocks down. So it's a throw size quilt, it's a throw size blanket, and I just thought this was so cute. So this is the back of my quilt. Again, I'm using, I've been stitching it up on my Bernina. I've been using, I put the walking foot on. When I'm doing quilting in straight lines, I use these gloves. I know you can buy specific quilting gloves. I got these gloves at Ross for $3, so that's a bargain. I am doing zigzag stitching around the blocks. I'm gonna unpick this because I was gonna do something different with the quilting and then changed my mind. I spray basted it, pin basted it. I just got back from the store and I got some fabric for the binding. So I'm gonna use this orange. It's kind of like a grunge. This is gonna be my binding for the quilt. I think that will work out well to match kind of both on the back and the front. And then I got this like light orange thread. So I'm gonna finish quilting the top of it with the white thread that's on there and a zigzag stitch, and I'm gonna switch it later to this orange thread to do the binding. I've probably broken all of the quilt rules on this quilt because I'm using a blanket for the back. I'm using polyester batting. A lot of people prefer cotton batting. I didn't send it to a long armor. I'm quilting it myself. I'm using a decorative stitch. I'm probably breaking all of the quilt rules, but you know what? I'm actually loving the texture of how this is coming out. I think it kind of looks like a puff quilt, and I'm kind of loving that. And so I'm about to put my quilting gloves back on and just keep going and continue working on this. And then later I'll cut up my binding and add that, and we're gonna see where we get to with this today.
I like to use this 505 temporary adhesive spray, and I just spray a little bit in between my backing and my batting, and then smooth it with my hands, and then again between the quilt top and the batting layer, just spray a little.
Okay, so I'm going to change my stitch to a zigzag, and this is what I did last night. And so I've already zigzagged around some of these blocks, but I haven't done all of them yet, and I think it's adding a nice texture to the quilt. I have these grippy gloves on. Again, I got these at Ross. These are technically gardening gloves, but they have that kind of sticky, tacky texture on it, so it gives you a little more to work with when you're going with it through. So I need to see, where did I get to last night? Figure out where I need to be on this. I'm just gonna gather this all up into my lap and then make sure I'm all good here. Line it up. Controlling the weight when I'm stitching at home is the hardest part to me. Okay, here we go. So see, I've got all this extra kind of bulk that I kind of have to manage through the machine. Everything rethreaded. We're gonna try this again. Putting my little sticky gloves back on. Try to find where I had started from. Okay, so I'm starting from here. I'm gonna try to keep the bulk of this up here so it's not all the weight going everywhere. I'm gonna line this up again. What I am doing is I am using a zigzag stitch. So I'm just trying to line it up on there. I do have my walking foot on. just kind of trying to keep this seam centered in between these two parts of the walking foot so the zig and zag is hitting both sides of the blocks. And I kind of like the way that's looking. And like I said, because of it being polyester, it's giving it like a high lofted look. Got that whole row done, and I now this I think I can come out probably. Okay, I'm just gonna move on to the next side here. I'm just gonna start up here. Letting the walking foot do its thing.
I just continued this process until I finished going around all of those center blocks. The pattern that I used for this quilt is called the King's Crown, and it's a free pattern. I did a tutorial on the making of the individual blocks. They finished to just over 12 inches, and so I ended up doing 4 blocks across and 5 blocks down. So it's a good throw size quilt. And I'm just, again, going in between all of these blocks with that zigzag stitch. That's what I'm using to quilt all my layers together. So many times when you read a pattern, it gives very detailed instructions for the block construction. And then you get to the end of the pattern, and it may have even been a multiple page pattern. It could have been, 8 to 12 page pattern, and you get to the end and there's one sentence that says, sew your blocks into rows, sew your rows into a quilt top, based, quilt as desired, add binding. And that's it. That's all the instructions it gives you at the end, because once you've put a few quilts together, it just expects you, the author of that pattern expects you to know how to quilt. And I feel like as a beginner, that's like one of the hardest things is figuring out, well, do I want to get this long armed? Can I handle this on my own machine? Am I going to ruin it if I try to quilt it? Is it going to look super rustic? And it's fine. If it looks super homemade, you put a lot of time and effort and love into it. And hopefully the person that's receiving it or using it is not going to be looking at it with the same critical eye that you would look at it. They're probably looking at it as this person that loves me made this quilt for me. They're probably not looking at it with a magnifying glass, checking it for errors. So this quilt is actually going to my mother-in-law, and she has a fall birthday. And she's a big Charlie Brown fan. That's why there's some Peanuts fabric in it. She also, big UT fan, University of Texas fan. And so as is half the state, the other half is Aggies. And so this quilt is just a kind of hodgepodge of things that I thought she would like. And I'm excited to gift it to her. And again, I don't think she's going to be looking at it with a super critical eye. I hope not. If you're wondering how many lines of quilting you need to do where you're going through all the layers, many times your batting will tell you. So when you look on the package of your batting, it will tell you if it needs to be quilted every 5 inches or every 10 inches, every 3 inches, like how close together do your batting lines need to be. I believe that this polyester batting that I had said the lines need to be at least every 8 inches. And I know that my center blocks are 6.5 inches and finished 6 inches. So those center blocks inside the diamonds, if I'm going around all of those and I'm doing lines at least that often, then I'm actually getting quilting lines at least every 6 inches. And so if my batting requirement said it needed to be quilted at least every 8 inches, then every 6 inches, I should be in the clear. That means that it shouldn't shift too much and the batting should hold up to washing with that level of quilting. Once you're satisfied that you have enough quilting lines on your quilt and you've met the requirements for your batting, the next step is going to be to trim up your quilt. So So what I do is just lay it out on my table, on my cutting mat, and use my long ruler to edge up along the side. And then I use my rotary cutter just to trim off all of that extra. And so it's a little bit of your batting, the backing, maybe a little bit from the edge of the quilt top. Most of the time I prefer to add borders because the borders allow you to trim without getting any of your patchwork cut off. But because I was using a throw size blanket for the backing, I did not have any margin to add borders. Had I been using a different type of fabric for the backing, I would have definitely added borders. Again, I'm using like a fleece, and when I'm cutting it, it is getting lint everywhere. There is lint all over me. There is lint all over the floor, lint all over the blocks. So the lint roller has to come out when you're working with any type of fleece or minky or, just the lint is crazy. It's worth it though. It's worth it for the cuddly result. You just need to repeat that process on all four sides of trimming off all that extra. After you're done squaring up your quilts and you've lint rollered, the next step is to join up your binding strips. And this is again where I am breaking rules because I am not laying it down on the angle. I am just putting these right sides together, and this is just faster and easier to me. So I know this is not the technically right way to put your binding strips together, but it also works. So this is what I'm doing today. And again, I'm using that orange grunge, which I think is going to look really cute on this Halloween Texas quilt. The other rule I'm breaking right here is that I cut my binding strips to 3 inches wide, which you may be thinking 3 inches is way too wide. It should be 2.5, or even some of the quilters use 2.25. But the thing is, I used a thick batting. The polyester batting is thick. And then I used a thick backing fabric because I'm using that fleece blanket for the back. So my quilt sandwich is very puffy and thick. And when I've done blankets for my kids before with similar materials, I had seen someone say that if you switch to 3-inch binding strips, you just give yourself a lot more room to come up and around all of those layers. So I am using 3-inch binding strips. After I have all my strips sewn end to end, the next step is to iron them, and I'm folding it with the wrong sides together and then ironing it in half. This is to prepare it for adding the binding to my quilt top. Preparing the binding strips can seem just kind of tedious. I've tried purchasing the bias tape, but I just did not love that. And I am happier with the results when I make my own binding. And so here I'm just kind of trying to hold it up against the edge of the quilt and measure, did I make enough yet? Nope, gotta make some more. So continue folding and ironing. And even though this part is kind of the boring part to me, I know that it's one of the final steps to getting your finished product. Okay, the end is in sight. Binding strips have been prepared. I'm going to leave a nice long tail for myself, roughly 8 to 10 inches. Then I'm going to put raw edges next to raw edges, and I am going to machine sew this binding on. So I am starting from the back, raw edges to raw edges. When I get down to the corner, I'm going to stop. I'm going to fold it up and then fold it back. This is to prepare the corners, and then I'm going to continue stitching down. Stitch, back stitch when you start the next side. Do a little backward stitch right there just to lock it into place. And again, depending on how large your quilt is, just managing the bulk of it can be the tricky part. And then with a fleece or a minky, it can be a lot thicker and it can be a little bit hard to handle. I have tried using the walking foot for this part because I've heard some people recommend using the walking foot for attaching the binding, but I find it very hard to do a 1/4 inch with the binding, with the walking foot. I feel like putting my 1/4 inch foot back on is easier for me. But I know some quilters say they prefer to do the binding with the walking foot. So I don't know. Leave me a comment down below and tell me what is your preferred method for putting binding on. Because I always feel like this is the part of the quilt that is a struggle point for me, but I feel like I do better with my 1/4 inch foot. Just repeat the same process at each of the 4 corners. Fold it up, fold it back, and keep going. Okay, you're about to see me break another quilting rule. I am not going to put this binding together the technically correct way. I am going to match my edges up with the 2 tails, and then where they meet, I fold them back and finger press them so that I can see that line. And then I put my 2 right sides together, and then I sew on that line that I finger pressed. And this is not technically the right way to do binding, but it works. And so I'm just over here breaking rules right and left. Don't report me to the quilt police. Now it's always the moment of truth. Once you sew those binding tails together, is to pull the 2 sides apart and check and see, before you trim those edges off, is it the right length? And if it's the right length, then success. Then you can lay it back out and go ahead and sew that on. And it's always so satisfying if you got it right and it's the correct length. I had to stop and trim off some loose threads that I saw. When I see things like that, I can't wait until the end, because if I see something like that, it bothers me and I have to do it right then. Okay, the next step is to fold this over to the front, flip it over, and I'm gonna machine stitch it down to the front of the quilt. And then this quilt top will be done and ready to enjoy and gift. This is where I was wishing I had had the space to add a border, because I feel like the edges, my points there would be less cut off had I been able to add a border, but the backing fabric that I had just did not allow for that. I still think this is such a cute quilt. I guess because I also have a fall birthday, anything that's like fall, cutesy Halloween, not horror Halloween, but cutesy Halloween, I just love all these prints. They just make me happy. Maybe also because it means summer in the Houston area is almost over and that cooler temperatures are on the way. Okay, for real, I just want to know, do you enjoy doing binding, or do you find it a necessary evil to have a finished quilt? Like, do you just love binding? Does it make you happy? Or are you only happy because it's like almost done with your project? Because I feel like the only reason why I enjoy binding at all is because it means that this project is in its final stages and then it's ready to be, off the design wall and on the couch, But the actual process of putting binding on is not my favorite part of quilting, if I'm being honest. I really had so much fun picking out all the fabrics for this quilt. There's a print in here that is candy corn, and I don't like eating candy corn, but I do think it's symbolic of fall and Halloween and cooler weather and happy times with the kids. And it's a fun print. I just thought the candy corn print was one of my favorites. The center of this next block, the little ghost with the pumpkin, I got that on a panel of border fabric that I got in a bargain bin at a quilt store for $4. And it was a whole bunch of that print, and I fussy cut out the little ghost and the little jack-o'-lantern. I hope you enjoyed this glimpse into my sewing room, things that I'm working on, how I finish some of my quilts. This isn't how I finish all of my quilts, but this is how I finished this one, and I hope you enjoyed it. Happy quilting!